I have, memories of like all kinds of spiritual stuff, like seeing spirits, seeing orbs, astral projection, all that kind of stuff. Um, just from even being a little kid, I just didn't know what was going on. I thought it was like my imagination or something like that, and that's what I was told growing up all the time was that was what it was. Um, and I think like after a while, you can kind of make that go dormant a little bit, where you kind of tune out to everything. And that's what I did. I just kind of tuned out to it all because I was being told that it was like ridiculous and, get get back to reality kind of deal. So um, that's what I did, just kind of tuned it out. Then when I was 20, 26, no, almost, yeah, 26, almost 27, um, my first child almost died. And so that kind of brought me back into this spiritual path that I'm on now. That was kind of the start of it. Um, but I think it came on so suddenly and very quickly that I didn't really know how to handle everything coming on. And so, I went through this whole like dark night of the soul thing that lasted like years and years and years. And, it was caused a whole lot of issues for me and stuff. Then I had a spiritual friend who kind of saw, me on this downward spiral and reached out and gave me a Reiki session, and that kind of like got me over that hurdle that I was stuck in that whole time. And you know now I am where I am now.
Sure. So when you say you were told that it was all kind of in your imagination, so were you brought up in a very kind of secular family or in a religious background? What sort of background did you have?
um it's kind of interesting. I came from two entirely different households. So my parents were, they divorced when I was a baby. um on my dad's side, though, he remarried a woman, and they were extremely religious. uh, Very, very, I mean, none of like, I remember being in trouble because I had like a vanilla smelling candle in my bedroom. So they thought that I was like worshiping the devil and all of this because I had a candle. I had a book about like fairies, and it was a book about like the history and the myths around fairies and making fairy gardens and stuff. And that was like this big sin, apparently. Like I had no idea why I was getting in trouble for this stuff because I'm like, what's going on? Um, but it was just a big thing. So I had a family that was very religious like that. And then on my mom's side, she was very open-minded to stuff. Like she would go see psychics and get readings and stuff like that. And so it was kind of confusing as a kid because I didn't really know what was okay and what wasn't okay because both my households were so different. Um, I went about 15, yeah, around 15 years old. Um, I started like kind of, no, I think I was earlier than that actually. I would have been more like 13 or so. My cousin and I started like practicing witchcraft and stuff, like just for fun. We had no idea what we were doing, but we were playing around with like Ouija boards and all this stuff. And, I definitely couldn't tell my dad or anybody about any of that. But I could tell my mom, and she was like, oh, that sounds crazy, like, and kind of played along with it. But, my dad, it would have been, they probably would have sent me off to have an exorcism or something. So, yeah, it's kind of interesting because I was raised kind of in both of those worlds, but at the time really confusing.
Absolutely. So you mentioned that you were having these astral projections as a younger girl. So what kind of experiences did you have? How did they manifest, and what were you told about them, and what did you believe about them?
Well, what it was is I kind of developed over. certain things that happened while I was a kid that were very traumatic for me. That's my first memory of it happening, is I just kind of remove myself from what my body during that situation. Um, and I've come to find out over time in working with spiritual mentors that have, they've been doing this kind of a very long time, for years and years and years. We're talking like 30, 40 years. Um, and they've told me that what I'm doing, what I've taught myself to do, is to literally, I'm using astral projection as a form um, of defense to protect myself against, anything else. And so when it happens now, it's kind of the same thing. It's usually when I'm put into a situation that makes me really uncomfortable or that I don't like. And I just tend to go away. And when it happens, I'm not going to like this whole different, universal plane or anything like that. Um, I remove myself from the physical body, but I actually see exactly what's going on. It's just that I have no feeling. It's like I'm disconnected completely from what is going on, but I'm above looking down, if that makes sense. Like, I totally see everything. I had a job that I didn't like at all. And it was the same thing. When I'd start to get really stressed out with this job, the job was getting done. My body was just kind of automatically doing what it needed to do, but yet I was above and watching it all take place. So it's interesting.
Yeah, for sure. So, do you believe then that you are literally leaving your body as consciousness, or do you see that more as kind of a psychological mechanism to help you cope with the situation, which I'm sure you've heard many times?
Yeah, I believe that I'm literally, the consciousness is like leaving my body then, because I'll see things, but I won't feel anything, if that, like, and I don't remember what anything feels like afterwards. I just remember what I see and what I saw, my body doing. I won't even see so much. I'll see silhouettes of other people, but if there's not like a deep focus when it happens on that other person, it's like they don't really exist either. They're just kind of like a silhouette of them. I don't really see so much of them, but it's like it would be if you were looking at like a spirit of somebody or something. Like, if like if you saw a ghost or something like that, that's what these people look like that are around during that time.
So it's almost as if you're kind of, yeah. So it's almost as if you're kind of shifting between frequencies, where once you come out of your body, you're on a different level where you are seeing now the energy of other people rather than their physical appearance of it.
Yes, exactly. Okay, that's a much better way to explain it.
Interesting. So what kind of explanations have people given to you for this, and what do you think of those kind of explanations?
I've had people, like, I've seen psychologists and stuff with that. And they say a lot of it is like anxiety, or it's an overactive imagination. That's what I was told when I was a kid. Now they don't really have a whole lot of explanation for it. They're just like, well, it just sounds like you're disassociating from the situation. And it's like, well, in a way, yeah, but it's entirely a different thing. If you look up the definition of what disassociation is, what's happening to me is entirely different. It's the closest thing that they can come up with as a scientific explanation, which I get. I mean, they're not taught anything on the spiritual end,
Yeah,
they're taught textbooks.
That's right. Yeah. So as well as your out of body experiences or your astral projections, what other kind of spiritual experiences have you had throughout your life that kind of give you your views about what we are as human beings, etc.?
Well, aside from seeing orbs, I do see those. I definitely do not see those as frequently as what Yer does. She sees those like, crazy. They're all over. I don't see them so much like that. Not as it's not as visual for me. Sense things instead, so I get a feel for energies that are around when there isn't anybody else around. Um, I do see like spirits, so rather than seeing a lot of orbs, I'll see spirits more frequently. Um, and that includes like animal ones. I have a specific cat that I've most recently watched, I guess, morph into a human. Um, this cat was one that kind of has followed me a little bit on this journey. So as I've kind of reached these different levels of awakening, I guess you would call them, there was at one point where all of a sudden I started seeing this black cat that it looked like like the ghost of a cat, basically. And I didn't really realize what this cat was until much later, when I realized that this cat was like a spirit guide of mine, because it was coming in during those times that like I was starting to feel, like that uncomfortable situations again, or feeling like I didn't belong somewhere, kind of out of place or whatever. And it's like then this cat would show up. And then I was in a meditation at one time, and when I opened my eyes, I briefly, I could feel like this cat was there again. And I opened my eyes and it was standing in the hallway. And I watched this cat just immediately kind of change into a human form. And then right as it changed, I asked in my mind, just instantaneously, I didn't even think about it, but I asked, "What's your name?" And it told me its name was like Akim is what it said. And I looked this up, and apparently it said it was a descendant of Jesus, which I found really interesting, So I've been kind of learning a little bit more and reading a little more about that and, where it comes from. But apparently it's an actual like spirit guide. I've never even heard of it before, So I was like, okay. um so I see a spirit guides, I guess. For myself, I don't know if if when I'm seeing other spirits like that, if they're other people's spirit guides, or if they really are um the spirits of people that have crossed over recently, that haven't transitioned to wherever they're going to go. I don't know. So I don't know what it is seeing, but I'm saying I don't feel any like, I don't feel any like negative vibes or bad energy or anything coming from them. So it's cool. And growing up and seeing this my whole life, being able to see spirits, I don't feel comfortable living in a home that doesn't have a spirit of some sort attached to it. Like I feel much more comfortable living in a home where I feel the energy, that there's something there. And I've never encountered a bad one yet. All of my houses have had some sort of spirit attachment, and they've all been very comforting and good. So it's interesting.
It is. So I'm sure most people would try to avoid places that they would consider haunted, because you always have the impression of things flying across the room and shadow people in the corner looking over you as you sleep and things like that. Which I think a lot of it is kind of popular culture, but
I was gonna say, I think a lot of that kind of stuff is more Hollywood than it is, anything else. And I've gone on like ghost hunts and stuff like that, and you feel the energy and stuff, but I've never witnessed anything flying across the room. I've never witnessed any kind of like you can feel sadness. I've definitely felt sadness on these excursions sometimes, but I've never felt, like
threatened.
anything.
Yeah.
Sadness feels like it's like a sadness coming from a loneliness. And I often think, whether it's a spirit of somebody that's passed over or it's the spirit of a spirit guide, if you're not recognizing, and energy lives on forever. So if you're not recognizing that it's there, you know, I would feel lonely. Like,
Yeah,
that's
for
gonna make me
sure.
feel that way.
For sure. You mentioned that you started looking into things like witchcraft, which I think is
Yeah.
quite a misunderstood thing. So could you go into briefly what witchcraft is, how you got involved with it, and how you practice it today, if you still do?
Well, younger when I got into it, I had no idea what I was doing, you know, so I was basing all of the experimentation that we were doing off of like watching these Hollywood movies like The Craft or something, you know, and you know, using Ouija boards and trying to invoke spirits and, you know, and stuff like that, which you still can do, but on a spiritual plane, it's so similar to witchcraft, you know. Um, if you're meditating and you're asking to, you know, connect with like your guides or something like that, at the same time in witchcraft and you're invoking a spirit, you're basically doing the exact same thing, you know. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. Um, if you're making like a home remedy of some sorts, you know, maybe you don't like regular over the counter, you know, cough medicine or something, so you decide you're gonna like make your own with like, you know, mullein leaf and elderberry or whatever, you know, and honey and lemon or something. Right there, you're making yourself a potion. You know, you're doing the same thing. It's just that the intention behind it is a good one rather than something that's negative. um I think just like with anything, you can have your dark side of it and you can have your light side of it, you know, and there's that bad and there's the good. And it just all comes down to the intention that you're setting. Um, you know, I work with the moon a lot, with different moon phases in that. Um, that can be considered to be some sort of witchcraft if people wanted to call it that. You know, I drink moon water, I make moon water, I drink moon water. They could call it whatever they want to. Um, you know, I work with crystals. I do shadow work. If people use my shadow work books that I make, um, some people will use them for shadow work. Other people will use them as like to write down their spells. Spells are nothing more than just writing down an intention, you know, a way to try to manifest something. And when you're doing like any kind of, you know, witchcraft or magic, so to speak, in that sense, you're just adding more to it. So instead of just writing your intention down and then, you know, working with just that intention, you might be writing that intention down and then deciding, well, you know, I'm going to throw in some of this, and this, and I'm going to work with this crystal to try and help make this, you know, this spell that you're doing a reality. Um, it's really nothing more than just adding a little bit more to it and giving it a little bit more push, you know, just a few more ingredients to try to move it along.
Yeah.
Um,
So it seems
but in
just
my
more to be more of a spiritual practice than any sort of like a cult, at what people would
Yeah,
commonly think
yeah.
of as magic or spells and potions and things like that.
A lot of people really think of it as being like this bad negative thing, but even if you read the Bible, you know, you have there's clear indication in there of, you know, Jesus doing what would be considered nowadays witchcraft, you know, turning water to wine and like, you know, parting the Red Sea and things like that. Like, if you know, if you weren't a religious person and you had never heard anything about those stories at all, and somebody came and told you that story, you're going to automatically think that this person is like some powerful human being that's just doing some crazy witchcraft, you know. Like, you're not sit there and be like, oh wow, it's like a, you know, I should be worshiping this person,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah. I mean, the first thing, if someone was to come to me and we'd never heard of obviously Jesus turning water into wine, if they came up to me and said somebody's just turned water into wine, or did you hear about this guy that's been, I would think, yeah, you've been scammed. You know, it's a magician's trick. Now, I wouldn't necessarily jump to witchcraft or believe it was real. I'd just say you're just talking nonsense. You've been tricked. It's immediately where my mind would go. But you mentioned shadow work. So what exactly is that?
So shadow work is kind of a way where you can dig in deep to all of those buried parts of your ego. So all those darker sides of you that you don't really like to show people, you kind of keep them hidden a little bit. The internal wounds that kind of harbor and maybe lay dormant for a while, but they're those ones that are gonna sneak up, come back out eventually. All those areas that need healing that haven't been healed. Um, Shadow work is a way of kind of tapping into those and bringing them up to the surface so that you can heal from them.
I see. Because I think, again, whenever people would hear of something like shadow work, even just the term shadow would invoke something negative, like the shadow
Right.
men and shadow figures and whatever. Whenever you talk about shadow,
Call it light work. No, you can call it light work. It's gonna bring you to that positive side when you do it. So, I mean, people can. It's a title.
Yeah,
It's all
sure.
it is.
So another thing you mentioned that I'm interested in is you talk about the cycles of the moon. Now, as someone myself who's very kind of scientific minded by nature, I struggle to see how the moon being lit by the sun in certain ways, depending on its position or whatever, how that can have any effect over us, directly. So how would you explain that works?
Some people I do believe, just because I experience it myself, are much more sensitive to that thing. So you have people that tend to be more sensitive towards like sun and that. Then they get kind of gloomy, sad feeling, whatever, because there isn't sun out. Then you have people who are a little more sensitive to the moon, and I think a lot of that depends on the more of the energy that is instilled in you. So you have the sun is representative of masculine energies, and the moon is representative of your feminine energies. Um, if you look into your zodiac signs and stuff like that, you have signs that tend to carry more and more of one energy than they do another energy, if that makes sense. So in my chart and from my understanding, so the zodiac thing I'm not super you know um skilled at. That's kind of more yours department. But from my understanding, with talking with her and a couple of other friends of mine that study this stuff, I have more signs in my chart that carry this feminine energy than I do a masculine energy. So that to me makes sense as to why then the moon has a stronger effect on me. um Retrogrades, like Mercury retrogrades, you see people that they got their arms up in the air, they're freaking out because there's a Mercury retrograde going on. And I tend to feel those same things that they do, but I feel them for a couple of weeks prior to it happening. And I think and then when the retrograde comes on, it's like a smooth ride for me. I think part of that reason is because I was born during a retrograde. So I just am a little bit more sensitive to it coming up. Same as like, when you're in the womb and you're kind of settling into your position before you're born, you're getting things all ready. And I think that's kind of what happens with me, is it's like I'm settling in those couple weeks before the retrograde. And then when it hits, it's like, okay, there's birth, like now we're good. And I think it's kind of on a similar aspect as that with the moon phases and stuff. Like, I wouldn't say that like I feel things that are much different, but it's an area that resonates with me. I'm just very, very pulled and drawn to the moon as it is. I find it to be just absolutely fascinating. I can sit outside and just stare at the moon for like hours on end, taking pictures of it and just watching it. Like the night sky in general is something that just one of my absolute favorite pastimes, is literally sitting outside and just looking at the stars and the moon and finding different constellations and that kind of thing. So of course, then working with the moon is something that's going to resonate with me too, because it's one of my most fascinating universal concepts that I think there is all of that. And when you trace it back to all these other traditions, these ancient traditions, they used the moon cycle at the same time. And especially if you're a woman, when a woman goes through her cycle, it's very much in conjunct with the moon phases itself. So I find that it typically tends to be women that feel a little bit more drawn towards the moon, and you know, kind of have these sensitive moments when they're, when the moon's going through these different phases, and they're kind of feeling that change within themselves too. And it makes sense. If our cycles are conjunct with the moon phases, of course we're gonna feel different during different moon phases, just to kind of make sense to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
It might not. You're guy. You might not get that part, but
I mean, conceptually, I can understand. Yeah, what you're saying, because you're both going through the monthly cycles that as females and the moon itself. So yeah, as the moon changes, so do you, I suppose.
I've noticed different. Like I have a whole little altar over there that is designated to working with the moon, and I use like these moon cards, and it's just a short little quick kind of moon ritual type of thing. It's nothing huge, nothing crazy. I'm not going outside and dancing naked around a fire, under a full moon or anything like that. I'm sitting there lighting one of my candles and doing whatever that manifestation is. So I when I work with the moon, I work on a specific manifestation goal or something along those lines. And it's something simple, it's step by step, because I don't want to jump to a huge picture. I'm not going to get there. I have to take the steps to get there, just like anything else. If you're manifesting something, it just doesn't happen overnight. It's something that you have to, it opens your eyes up to the little opportunities that are being given to you, so that you can take the next step and work your way up to that, to the bigger goal. And so when I'm with the moon, it's initially what I do with it, and it's also comforting. It brings me, peace of mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
We all have we got our little rituals that we do all day long.
Yeah. Yeah.
We at a certain time, we go to sleep at a certain time, we get up and we have our steps that we take in the morning. They're all rituals, and this is just
another one. Yeah, sure. So how have you found any overlap with or I suppose, how is your religious background on your father's side of the family? How is that? Have you found that has influenced any of your beliefs at all, or made you question anything, or how has it kind of had an influence over your life in general?
I would say it has a little bit. To be honest, it gave me a little bit of a push more towards spirituality, because there was so much in that religious upbringing that it didn't resonate with me. I had a lot of questions about it, but I couldn't get any actual answers. It was always, well, you just have to have faith, and it's like, but that's not the answer I need.
Yeah, that's just hoping that it will happen, not taking steps to make sure it does. Right. Yeah.
And in this being on, this spiritual path, so I think it kind of did push me to that a little bit, because I found more logic and things that actually made sense on this path than I did, going to church all the time. And I mean, it wasn't about just having faith and believing in something on this path. There's literally a history traced back all the way into the Bible. You can read the Bible and see where Jesus was doing Reiki on people, and where he was doing what would be considered like spellcraft type of magic and stuff like that. And you can kind of trace back and see where all of that is. And it's like, okay, so in religion, all of this takes place anyway, I mean, your Christian Catholic religion stems back and is based off of paganism, like the history of it literally has the same initial core belief and everything as what paganism does.
Yeah.
So
I think one thing that I struggle with,
it's
especially,
like, it's like,
I was just going to say, I think that one of the things that I struggle with Christianity, especially because I was sent to a Christian school as a kid, not for any reason other than it was just the closest school to our house, which was literally down the end of the road. And one of the things I always thought when we were given Bible readings and told that, this Bible is the word of God, I always thought, and I still think now, but, the Bible was written 2,000 plus years ago. Throughout that time, do we really think it still carries the same meaning as it was originally intended to? I mean, given the fact that the culture in which it was written had completely different values, different metaphors, different understandings, nowhere near as scientifically literate as we are now. And plus, even throughout history, the kings and the rulers would have got hold of this Bible, and you don't think that they may have altered it to some degree to suit themselves. And I mean, we know that things like a good friend of mine was telling me about the Lost Gospel of Thomas. I think it's Lost Gospel of Thomas or something like that, which was deliberately taken out, which talked about, literally the kingdom of God is within us, but also how manifestation works in the fact that, yes, Jesus said, I'm the Son of God, but that means that so are you. It doesn't mean that you must believe in me and believe in God to go to heaven, because you are effectively a God in a way yourself. And, the fact that that sort of thing is no longer in the Bible just makes me think that how accurate is it to take that as a meaningful document for the reality of life and consciousness?
yeah, absolutely. And it brings you to it's like Christ consciousness. It's the same kind of concept. These days it's like they've lost what that means. Christ consciousness is not about getting you connected to some powerful being of some sort, but it's literally helping you to realize that you are that powerful being in yourself. Like you're there too. It's just activating that and bringing that out. And whether you're going to church every day and you're singing your hymns and all of this and you're praying and stuff, or you're going to whatever your sacred place is to go to and you're meditating to activate that Christ consciousness, it doesn't matter what you're doing as far as a practice. The point is understanding what it is, and then setting attention to actually achieve that. And I think where that religious part, that's where that line is kind of drawn a little bit, is religion. It seems like the religious community has kind of forgotten what that means.
Exactly. And even worse than that, many religions actively frown upon, as you were saying earlier, such practices as sinful or of the devil, whereas in reality, it's no different from, as you say, singing a hymn or praying, because it's the intention behind it, and it's just the mechanism through which you're accessing it. Some people access it better through prayer, which doesn't work for me generally because I don't believe in that sort of thing, but that's probably just my mindset. Some people through meditation, some people through singing hymns, some people through simply watching their breathing, which I suppose comes under meditation. But I think I find that through your kind of spell work and witchcraft and things, just completely different avenues to the same goal. But I find that, as you were saying, religion actively frowns upon that sort of practice as sinful, even though they are preaching the end goal, which we are all trying to reach through different ways.
Right. And if you look at it, there's such a connection to it. People pray, and you get people that they put their hands like this and they're bowing their head or whatever when they're praying. This is a mudra.
Yeah.
Like this is a heart opening mudra right here. So it's like, it is no different. It just has a different title in whatever community or belief system that you're part of. Those are areas I try to discuss with my own family that is very religious, and explaining, like, you go to church to celebrate, to meditate. I sit in my yard in the grass with nature. Like you pray, I say thank you.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's, you ask for what you want, and I, show gratitude for what I have. Like, we have the same intention, where there's the same goal there. We're trying to achieve the same thing. It's just a different way of practicing
Exactly.
it.
And I think that's
Neither wrong.
no, exactly. I think that's also a shame, that between religions, different religions, have historically and still do have disagreements with each other to the extent that they cause wars between religions, and other religions are frowned upon. But ultimately, whether you're praying to God, whether you're praying to Allah, whether you're praying to, I don't know, a Hindu god Ganesh, whether you're not religious but spiritual and kind of giving thanks to yourself and the universe, you're communicating with exactly the same thing. You just define things a bit differently and have different ideas and rules and laws, which are all human made anyway. And I always kind of come back to, in my own mind, the idea of things like when someone that you love dies and you bury them or you cremate them and you put a grave on top. Some people go to see that gravestone every day, to see the person that's gone. Whereas I always think I'd rather not do that, and I'd rather just sit at home and think about them, because, in my opinion, whether you're at the gravestone or whether you're at home, they're always with you no matter where you go. And I would just find it depressing to go and be reminded that they're not there by looking at a stone, personally. And again, I think it's, different methods of achieving the same thing. No matter, how you do it or where you do it, whether you're praying in a church, whether you're meditating at home, whether you're in a mosque praying, it makes no difference. You're still communicating with God or consciousness or the ultimate or the universe, whatever you want to say. But I think ultimately, finding out what these realities are, I think approaching it from religion is, if it's on a personal level, is good. But I think to really establish it as truth, I think is a matter for science, because it's something that involves reality as it is for everybody involved, and everybody and everything, every animal, every plant is connected to it in some way. Yeah. And of course, I think what you do with your witchcraft and meditation, I think, is all a science, and it's all a method of discovery for oneself. But unfortunately, it seems to be very much frowned upon, even in the scientific community, as bogus or pseudoscience or woo, as they like to say.
It is, but I do see that there is a lot of that are kind of becoming a bit more open-minded to that stuff. I mean, there's still a lot of closed-mindedness to it, and a lot of fear, around it, because it's taboo still. But at the same time, I encounter so many more people, and even, hear about scientists and stuff that actually are like, I think there's some truth to this, and this is, here's our scientific standpoint of it, here's our data that we found, about it. And they're kind of coming out with it a little bit more, and I think that's great. It's kind of it's a journey, and it's a little bit of a battle sometimes to, but you have the people that are on the forefront that are putting it out there and that are doing that fight to help, shine light on all of it and bring it all together, and that's part of my job as being here, is doing that, is accepting it and showing that that because I practice this stuff, it doesn't make me a bad person or an evil person, and it doesn't make the next person doing it or the person after that doing it either. That we believe this connection, and showing that there's not just one way to reach those higher states of consciousness and connect with that. There's so many different ways to do it. This is just one way. I mean, everybody feels like humans are just so lost without some sort of guidance and some kind of belief system. There has to be something there, or it's like, I've seen this in people, even the ones that seem lost, they're still searching for that. This is just one other way of being able to find it. Whether you are going to be a Buddhist monk, or, you're going to be a Catholic, or, engage in witchcraft. Like, they're all the same thing, just ways of doing it. So
Yeah, absolutely.
you know.
So I suppose to kind of look at the main question that I focus on the channel, which is death. What's your view of death? What happens to us, our loved ones, our pets, our animals, whatever, at the time of death? Because of course there's three main kind of views, which is the scientific view. Once you die because your brain is you. Consciousness and who you are comes from your brain. Once that's gone, you're gone forever. There's the religious view, which is generally in the West heaven or hell, but depending mainly not on what you do or how good you are, but whether you believe in God or not, which to me is black male, but other people have different opinions. And then the more spiritual belief that your consciousness or your mind separates from your physical body and travels into some unknown but beautiful place, depending on how your mind is at the time of death. So what's your view personally on that?
So this being a topic that I have thought a lot about. My view on this is, for one thing, when you pull in aspects of the science part of it, we know that when our physical body dies, our mind actually, for a split second, I mean, just long enough, realizes that the body is dead. Well, whatever you've been conditioned to believe up until that point, I believe is what your mind is going to manifest for you, you know? So if you're brought up in a super religious family and you believe that you know, you're going to heaven because you've done all these phenomenal, nice, awesome things throughout your life, and that's where you're going to go, that in that second when your mind actually realizes my body's dead, your mind is automatically going to go straight to whatever it's created to be as heaven in its mind throughout that time. If you believe, well, I'm just dead, my body's going to rot in the ground and feed everything, and that's just the end of it, your mind's basically initially going to be like, okay, that's it, you know. That's where we're going. And if you're in your mind, your belief system is that, you know, you're going to just be dispersed into all these little energy fields and just travel all over the place, you know, into these different realms and whatever, then in that second that your mind realizes the body's dead, it's initially going to go back to that thought. And that thought is going to be the final thought it has, you know. On my standpoint, what I believe being that I've seen orbs and spirits, and, you know, the way I see spirits are almost with an aura type of deal around them. Who's to say that when I'm seeing that, what I'm not seeing is like a huge orb, right? Maybe these little orbs that you're seeing are actually orbs that are super, super far away, you know, so you're not seeing the full picture. You're just seeing a small silhouette of the aura around it. And when you're seeing spirit that, you know, looks like it's a human size, that what you're seeing is a close-up of an orb that's literally standing right there now with you, you know, right in that presence. I believe that when the body dies, you know, you become one with Mother Earth. And this kind of goes into that pagan type of belief style, you know, that you kind of become part of that circle of life. So now your body rots and it feeds the, you know, the worms, the maggots, whatever, the beetles, you know, it feeds all of that. It feeds the grass, and another animal comes along and eats the grass. You're now part of that animal, you know, and so on and so on. So I believe on the physical aspect of things with your physical body, that's what happens. But as far as where does the soul go, that I believe is made up of energy. And so that energy literally just becomes one with everything else, because everything else is made up of energy. I can pick up an item that, you know, maybe I'm drawn to or whatever, and there's been times where I picked something up and I've had, like, all of a sudden a vision of my sister who passed away pop into my head, you know, or I will suddenly feel like her presence is with me, or like her hand is on my shoulder or something like that. And it's when I pick up that item. And that to me is a sign to me that part of her energy has been put into that item now. That's something that comes home with me.
Yeah. And that is kind of a
But-
very common spiritual belief that we do kind of dissolve into everything and become one with everything, which, of course, we know, that our bodies certainly do, because, as our body breaks down, the nutrients get eaten by the worms and, as you say, get fed into the grass. We do literally, our bodies become one with everything. But I think what people would most like to know about death is not so much about their energy as such, not so much about their body and how that. I think most people would be concerned about their experience, their first person perspective. Are they? It's the fact that their energy is going to go into everything. Does that mean that they're no longer conscious, but their energy is still? Because I think for me personally, that thought of being unconscious, never being conscious again for eternity, no matter what my energy is doing, if it's not a personal energy and there's no POV, point of view, whatever that's going, whatever my body's doing, the thought of just never being conscious again terrifies me, And I think with things like evidential mediumship, as well as the out-of-body experience, the astral projection that you've had, there seems to be a retention of individual personality and memories after we die, at least for a period of time.
Right.
And as you were saying about the mindset at death kind of dictates what happens to your experience after death. I've always said, I'm just going to go and explore around the earth, places I've never been to. I'm going to go flying on dragons. They just have fun, things that I was never able to do on earth due to the pesky physical laws that exist. But so what's your thought on what our experience will be from the moment we take our last breath?
So I don't think you lose consciousness at all. And the reason I think that is because I'm also a certified hypnotist, and there's no way that I could do that on people and bring them into where they do past life regressions and can then connect to these past lives. I've had people that have connected to past lives where they were not human. One person was a dolphin in a past life. So there's no way that you can lose consciousness, and then how do you remember that stuff? People all of a sudden have these, like, in past life regressions, some of them will start saying things that are in an entirely different language, and I record these sessions, because when that happens, it's, they usually want to know, what the hell was I saying and where is this from? So if you can get that translated, then that gives a little bit of an idea for that. And it's really neat how people do that. My kids alone, actually, they say things sometimes, and before I really even understood what past life regression was and what any of that kind of stuff was, my kids were saying stuff and it was like, oh, they've just got a silly imagination or whatever. But then it's like, but how do they even know about that?
Yeah. Yeah. Have you ever had any cases, as you say, where people end up speaking a different language that you've then been able to translate to show that it has been accurately spoken?
Yeah. There's been, I've had one session of somebody who has done that. And they weren't speaking it. They saw a language, like symbols and stuff, in their head. And so as we were doing this past life regression, as they were under hypnosis, they were drawing the symbols that they were seeing too. And this is somebody that I've done one of these sessions on numerous times. So it took a long time to be able to get up to that point of where they were able to go into a trance and do the automatic writing, because that takes a lot of practice to get to that point for most people. I'm sure there's people out there that can just do it right away. But for this particular client of mine, it was a lot of sessions leading up to that. Ones prior to that, they were getting little visuals of this and that, different like environments and situations and things that like that, and it was just little pieces. And it wasn't until we actually got to that point where they were able to do the symbols that we were able to kind of trace them back to more of an ancient civilization that they were part of. We have yet to figure out what their role was as far as in that civilization, what their role was, what they were doing, if they were just somebody in society, or if they had like a higher, respectable, powerful type of job, if they were in control of some aspect, maybe they were a criminal. Like, we have yet to figure out that portion of it. But we know now that they, were connected. And so it's neat. It's neat to do, but a lot of people that do past life regressions, they do only get just below the surface a little bit, because they go to one and then they're like, whoa, like, that's enough for me. I don't want to come back for more. Most of my clients that have undergone that is how it's been. They've gone to one, maybe two, and then they haven't really wanted to go too much further into that, because it starts to get a little messy. People, yeah. And the individual is all about it. Like, this is all they want, is to know.
So I suppose the question is then, are they accessing? Oh, I mean, there's three possibilities. A, it's all in their head, and it's just kind of an imagination thing. B, that they were kind of, their individual consciousness was this other individual consciousness at some point, or that it was the same individual consciousness had this different experience previously. Or the third option could be that they're tapping into what some call the Akashic records and are pulling information from an experience that has taken place but wasn't necessarily their own. What do you think is most likely of those?
I think it's the same individual's consciousness. It's just the past memories and the past experiences that they had during that time. Every single life leading up to that adds more and more to it. Then you get to, where we are now, and you might have had 30 different lives going on, so you have all these different memories. Like, I have little bits and pieces of memories of things that I'm like, nobody at all remembers this happening, but I remember it in clear detail. It wasn't imagination. It's something that I literally know. I have, I can remember this happening and having a scar from this now, but nobody else remembers that happening.
Yeah.
But yet I carry the scar of it, and it's like, well, how does that work?
Indeed, yeah.
So I feel like you do kind of have this consciousness that just keep adding little by little, experience after experience, and our minds can only hold so much information at a time, so a lot of these past experiences, they're there, but not brought to the surface unless we actually really try to go searching for them. They typically are going to stay as a past experience, just because our mind isn't capable of carrying and holding all of that all at the same time. You got to kind of knock a little bit of it out for a while to bring in that old, and then it's like you have knocked that old back out again once you've kind of experienced that part to bring in the new again.
Yeah.
There is a limit to what can be
what can be stored. Yeah. Past life regression is one of those things that I've always wanted to do, just out of curiosity, to try and understand more deeply the reality of these things. But I've never been able to find someone that actually does it nearby, but I'll have to keep looking. But it sounds like an interesting experience to go through, certainly. And you also, of course, got things like life before life, life between life regressions by Dr. Newton and things like that. Have you ever had experiences with anything between lives, the moments between lives?
No, not me personally, and I haven't encountered anybody that has, that I know of. They haven't not really know what it was that they were experiencing at that point and at that time, and just kind of, you hear stories about it, but I personally haven't met anybody yet that.
No. I think with hypnotherapy and using hypnotherapy as kind of a form of evidence to say that this does happen, you've got to be very, very careful with the way you do it, because of course, as you know, in the hypnotic states, you're very, very open to suggestion by the person that's speaking to you. So the practitioner has to be very careful to ensure they're not like asking leading questions and placing images in the person's mind, which I think is why I struggle. Although I'm sure you know Dr. Michael Newton's books, The Destiny of Souls, Journey of Souls, I find those very interesting, but it's difficult to take them as evidential because you don't know his specific line of questioning, whether it was leading, not deliberately, of course, but just by the nature of it. So, which is why for past lives and things like that, I like to look to people like Ian Stevenson's work, Jim Tucker's work, who investigate these past lives and find information to corroborate, and things like that. But certainly, I think for a personal experience, things like life between life regressions and past life regressions are certainly very important to have if you're interested in this kind of thing, to understand it.
I think there's some people that are a little bit, they're not open-minded enough to be able to accept any of that, so it's probably not the area for them to to experiment with and engage with at the moment, because there's people that have very busy minds too. They haven't mastered being able to slow the mind down to actually get into that state. So then when they try, just don't get there, and they're like, yeah, this is just a bunch of BS.
Yeah.
So it definitely takes people that are open-minded enough and also have mastered that ability to just turn the conscious mind off, to silence that down, to literally block everything out pretty much. Because even if when they're under that hypnotic state, and even if they're blocking out your voice, it doesn't even matter, because your subconscious mind it doesn't rest. It's constantly, it's absorbing everything. So it's still absorbing all of those suggestions from the hypnotist anyway.
Mm-hmm. So I suppose finally, what would you say regarding your thoughts about what comes after death? What would you say to those who argue strongly that that's impossible, because we know that the brain produces consciousness, we know that everything is explainable physically, and I'm afraid that once you die, everything else is just unevidenced wishful thinking? What would you say to that?
What would I say to them? I'd say that's awesome. I'd say that's cool that is their belief. That's what resonates with them. And, keep doing what you're doing. If that's what you believe and that's what really hits home for you and, is what brings you comfort and makes you feel at peace with the whole concept of dying someday, then keep believing that belief and doing it, because you don't want to live in fear of having that fear of death and what's going to happen to me. So find something that brings you that comfort and that peace of mind of when that time comes for you, so that you're not, living this life of fear, and instead you can live your life of enjoyment and just take it day by day. If that means that only believe all the scientific data that you can find, then believe that,
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell you you're wrong for it. My belief is different because, I am not a scientific data-driven person so much. Like, I find it interesting. I'll pay attention to it and stuff, but I question everything at the same time. So it doesn't end there. I want to know, if you got all this data and stuff, like, what came before that? Like, what came leading up to all of this data that you got? What triggered you wanting to do these experiments and figure that out? I want to know what goes beyond that. To me, I have, established a belief in as far as what happens after you die, and I've kind of established my own belief with that, and I feel okay and comfortable with that. Like, I'm okay with the fact that if today is my day, and I'm done, like, I'm all right with that, because I feel like I know what's going to happen and where it's going to go, and and to me that just I'm all right with that idea. You know?